husband never told her that he's thinking of leaving until the day he taps her on the shoulder and says, "It's over and I'm out of here."
Welcome to Women Winning Divorce, the podcast helping successful women navigate divorce with dignity so you can protect yourself, your children, and your assets. I'm Heather Quick, founding attorney at Florida Women's Law Group, where women win at life. This week, we had Vikki Stark on the show, and we had a great conversation about what wife abandonment syndrome is, the hallmark signs to look out for, and the psychological effects of it on women. I hope this episode is valuable to anyone who might be listening. Stay tuned for the full episode. Welcome to this week's episode of Women Winning Divorce. I'm Heather Quick, owner and attorney at Florida Women's Law Group. Today, Vikki Stark is joining us. Vikki is the founder and director of the Sedona Counselling Center of Montreal, a psychotherapist and family therapist, and the author of Runaway Husbands, the Abandoned Wife's Guide to Recovery and Renewal. Oh my goodness, so much on that. Today, Vikki and I will be discussing how to understand wife abandonment syndrome, the stages of recovery, self-awareness, and the hardest aspects of coping, strategies for support and recovery. And welcome to the show, Vikki.
Hi, Heather. It's a delight to be here.
Well, I am so excited to have you on the show, and this book title will, I know everybody's anxious to hear all about it. However, I'd love if you could share a little bit about how you got to where you are professionally.
Oh, okay. So that's a pretty straight line. It's a pretty simple thing. I'm a family therapist, a marriage counselor, a psychotherapist, and I have been for a long time, since 1985. And so I've been in private practice pretty much. I opened the Sedona Counseling Center in Montreal, and then I'm also an author. So I've written 4 books. And I'm a specialist in divorce recovery. And one of my books, Runaway Husbands, is sort of the one that sort of launched this worldwide community of women in recovery from what I call wife abandonment syndrome.
Well, we got to jump right in because we would like to know a little bit, like, what exactly does that mean?
Okay, so this is there's lots of different kinds of divorce. Sometimes the man leaves, sometimes the woman leaves, but wife abandonment syndrome is like a very specific kind of divorce. And what that is for a woman who believes that she is in a happy, secure marriage. Her husband hasn't been complaining. He never told her that he's thinking of leaving or that he's very unhappy or whatever, until the day he taps her on the shoulder and says, "It's over and I'm out of here." And he leaves suddenly out of the blue with no forewarning. Often he leaves immediately. Sometimes he even leaves before he tells her. He empties out the house while she's at work and she comes home and his stuff is gone from the closet. Or sometimes he'll leave within the week or the month. And in 95% of the times, there's another woman on the scene. So he'll often leave the wife and move in directly with the other woman. So the fact that she had no forewarning, that it completely came out of the blue, they hadn't been fighting, he hadn't been talking about leaving, is really one of the particular aspects of wife abandonment syndrome, although there's a whole constellation of hallmarks that describe it.
Wow. And this is fascinating to me because obviously this is prevalent enough that you have done, you've done this research and written a book on it. And is abandonment something that the courts ever consider? Is this like just really more about how you mentally, and physically really deal with that particular type of situation?
Yeah, well, it's really, often, so I have a worldwide community. So, it's really very prevalent. Usually when I tell people about it, they say, "Oh, that happened to my aunt," or, "that happened to my cousin," or "that my neighbor," or whatever. People have heard about it. But the court really can't intervene, in terms of abandonment. It's just not something that's addressed in the court system.
Yes, that would be my experience, but that's why what you have is so helpful
Yeah,
because women don't feel that they have that relief in court. And now, how does this wife abandonment syndrome, when we're talking about, one of your clients, how does that experience for them? And I think I'm really messing up what I'm trying to ask, but I'm
good.
basically want to know, like, it's different than if there is a typical divorce, but it's different than like, hey, you've been to counseling, you guys been working on it, you're both aware that it's not working, right? And then, okay, a divorce is coming, or you're like, well, I didn't really think he would go ahead and be the first to file, but you're aware that there
Yes,
are problems. And so, okay, that has its own psychological, recovery and counseling for that. But then this, I imagine, is very different as far as how that affects you
totally.
as a woman psychologically. So that was a roundabout way asking is how do you approach that? Because I do believe that is probably quite. They must be in shock for a bit.
No, totally. And it is, it is a diagnosable trauma.
Okay.
When your life changes out of the blue from one moment to the next, and you had no preparation, it's sort of like, if you're in a car accident and it suddenly happens, and it's very traumatic because it's very hard to adjust when you've had no opportunity to see it coming. But some of the other aspects of wife abandonment syndrome sort of compound that level of trauma. Because what typically happens, one of the hallmarks, is that when the husband leaves, he then sort of turns on the wife and he denigrates the whole marriage. He puts her down. He blames her. He has a shopping list of everything she's ever done, that he says, you're too controlling and you're too sloppy and you're like this and you're like that. And so he totally sort of dismantles what she thought was a loving and caring relationship and what appeared to be a loving and caring relationship. And it not only alters her present and her future, but it also alters her past because he says to her, I was never happy. And that time we went to California on vacation and you thought we were having such a great time. I was miserable. And she's like, whoa, whoa, how is this happening? We seem to be
Mhm.
having so much fun. And it's sort of like burning the bridges as he leaves. In the process of leaving, part of the psychology on the part of the man is that he has to diminish the value of the relationship in order to justify him leaving from a marriage that was good enough.
Mm.
So that adds to that level of trauma. And the women in my community, and so first of all, this happened to me. I've been married 21 years, perfectly happy, no sign at all until he left. And so the women in my community, like me, I lost 30 pounds. I was
Wow.
so profoundly traumatized. And you're just obsessing. How did this happen? How did this happen? What did he mean when he said that? What really happened? Your whole reality is called into question.
Yeah. Wow. What I mean, I don't even know what is the hardest part of all of this because there's a lot.
Yeah. Well, the hardest part is sort of questioning your own sense of reality.
Yeah.
Was he always like this? Was he always like using me? Or did he suddenly change? A lot of women say, "Oh, I thought he had a brain tumor," because his behavior changed so dramatically. And the phrase that I use is that he morphs overnight from a loving husband to an angry stranger. And then he tries
Wow.
to go after her in court and get a bigger share of this, that, and the other thing. And, it just is so out of character. So I think the hardest part is trying to understand how does a person change so dramatically? And that's why they wrote Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. How does somebody's personality shift? And then
Yeah.
what was real and what was going on. And so a lot of women feel like I must be crazy. Like he's telling me all this stuff, and
Yeah.
I've always trusted him and I've always believed him. And so am I supposed to believe him now when it doesn't make any sense? And so they feel that they must be crazy, and they feel like I must be the only woman in the world that this happened to because this is so bizarre. And so
Mhm.
when they find our Runaway Husbands community, you mentioned that sense of relief. They get that sense of relief that, whoa, it's not just me. This exists and it has a name for it. And
Mhm.
there's help out there.
Now, what would motivate a husband to suddenly leave a supposedly happy marriage?
Yeah, great question. So a lot of the women in my community, I mean, not everybody, but a lot are sort of midlife, 50s, 60, we definitely have younger women, but I'd say the majority are in that age range. And a lot of times men feel as though they're going along in the marriage for the sake of the wife.
Okay. Okay.
So that it's like it's her home and she organizes the parties and she's all involved with the kids and he's sort of an adjunct, which is not to say that men don't love their children, they do.
Mhm.
But and
Mhm.
then he gets to a certain point in his life and he looks around and he says, I've been a good husband, I've been a good father, I've been a good son, I've been a good worker, I've helped with the kids hockey team. When is it my turn? And they look ahead and maybe their career is, not going to get any more robust. And they start worrying about their sexual performance. And some woman, shows an interest in them. Often it's in the office or somewhere where they meet somebody.
Mhm.
And suddenly they feel alive. And so that sense of feeling alive is so delicious and so precious that he feels like, that he has to go for it.
Hmm.
So, when you've been married to somebody for 35 years and had sex with this woman, every once in, so thousands of times, there's nothing new on the horizon in that area. But when you have an affair partner, there's nothing more exciting. And so
Right.
you suddenly feel like there's something to live for and you're going to go for it because a lot of men get worried that I'm going to lose it soon. I'm not going to be as strong. I'm not going to
Right.
be, there's no big excitement in my career. So what can I change? I can change the woman in my life.
Ugh. Ugh. So, all right. Well, obviously you are there to help so many women in your
Mhm.
community, that you've created
Yeah.
for women who have been through this. So let's talk about how can women trust again if they want to have another relationship? That has to be just, oh my gosh, such a I don't want to say obstacle, but yeah, like a real potential roadblock, that trust
100%. It's a
factor.
great question. Yeah. I mean, so first of all, they go through this terrible period, the initial period of sort of real depression and difficulty, and slowly start to crawl their way out of it. And it takes a long time.
Okay.
Um, people feel their friends after 6, 8 months say, he was no good, move on. And there's a big job to do emotionally to
Okay.
recover. And I'm just going to throw in here, I'll answer your question in a minute, that it's not only the wife, it's often the children who say, you were supposed to be my role model and you've been lying to mommy about your girlfriend for the past 2 years, or the
Mm.
adult children who look at him and feel protective of the mother. And he's now happy, elated with his
Yeah,
girlfriend,
carefree, just going
going
off.
on with his life. And she's, sitting in a dark room, crying. And so it affects the children, and it might also affect like her parents who loved him for 20 years and he was the son they never had. So it really affects this whole environment. So there's a lot of healing to be done,
Mhm.
to be able to get your feet back on the ground, and you're not going to be interested in meeting anybody for a long time. But there are
Mhm.
two kinds of women. There are those women who say, I can never trust again. So I am going to, shut down my heart and I'm not going to try to meet anybody. I'll stay at
Right.
home. I'll go with my friends traveling or whatever. And
Mhm.
even though it's so nice to be in a relationship, I'm never going to trust again. And then I'm perfectly safe.
Okay.
Or
Then
the
that's
other
mhm.
women who say, I am going to open my heart and I'm going to try to meet somebody because I like being in a couple. But that introduces an element of risk. Because who knows, you could be in another very positive relationship, and now we know that it's possible for a man to, say bye in the morning, go off to work, and then not come home because he moved in with his girlfriend. But so what I often say to women in our community is, you are never going to have an experience like this again, because now you know that it's possible. With your first marriage, you felt, babe, it's you and me against the world, and we are a team, and we're so great, like this. But, in a subsequent relationship, you're going to be able, first of all, to look for the red flags. So if you're meeting somebody and you're not 20 years old or 30 years old, most probably that person had a previous relationship, is maybe divorced. So how does he talk about his ex-wife? Does he call her a silly cow? Does he put her down? Does he diminish her? Or does he speak about her with more civility or more respect? That's a big indicator of how he views women when he's, turned off to them for whatever reason. And you will learn that it's not the same as it was like when my ex-husband and I first got together. We were like madly in love and it was great. And we're full, it was like, the heavens and earth stopped because we had finally found each other. The second time around, maybe you're going to be more circumspect and you're going to take it slower and you're going to get to know the person, and you're not going to, and I really don't recommend falling madly in love with somebody who's going to solve all your problems. It's nice to love somebody, but take it more slowly.
Right.
And so that trusting again is a challenge. But if you are going to be the kind of person who opens your heart and lets somebody in, then you have the possibility of having a decent, a nice second relationship that really fulfills that need to be in a couple and that can bring you some happiness. Because there are a lot of really nice men out there. Not everybody has that character of a covert narcissist, which is, many of the men in the Runaway Husbands community.
Yes. Now, how can women, how can they turn this crisis into something meaningful in their lives?
Right. Yeah. So for a lot of women, first of all, I often tell, I'm a therapist, not only a marriage counselor, and sometimes I'll work with a young woman, who's having problems at work or something, so that I always encourage women to be able to be independent financially, to have something to fall back on, even if you're not working currently, that you have some kind of education or some kind of career or something to fall back on in case, in case you ever find yourself in the boat of being a single person. So how do we turn this crisis of abandonment into an opportunity of change? First of all, throughout that whole process of recovery, the woman is working on herself.
Yes.
She's developing skills. She didn't want these skills. She was perfectly happy, in her life before, just enjoying things, having a good time. But now she's learning patience, and hopefully maybe she's working with a therapist who can help her develop a sense of self-love and not regret. And she's learning to manage her obsessive thoughts. And each one of those things that you have to work on when you're in a very struggling time of your life, they don't go to waste. You learn these techniques. And so, often women start journaling in order to deal with the pain, or they go to meditation class, or, and maybe they go into some kind of a therapeutic relationship, and they learn how to manage the emotional upset. But then often they're forced to develop something else in their life. So many of the women, either they go back to school or they go back to their nursing career, or, they take up fencing, or they do, they do something, they do something that they would not have done if they were married, because now they have all this time on their hands. The evenings and weekends sort of stretch long, And so you join a class or a gym or an activity,
Mm-hmm.
um, and you try to work on fighting the negativity and reaching for your happiness, which you can build on your own. And so that's really, the challenge. It's called post-traumatic growth. Um, so after a trauma, it's not unusual for individuals to have a spurt of emotional growth.
Hmm. Interesting. Now, you've mentioned that many therapists can't understand that what these women are going through has nothing to do with their childhood or attachment style. Can you share your philosophy for us?
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, of course, many women see therapists and they find it very helpful.
Right.
But a lot of therapists who are not familiar with wife abandonment, they look at the woman sitting in front of them and she's crying and crying. And next week she's crying and crying. And then the next week she's crying, that she's in such wretched state. She's not eating and she's not sleeping and she can hardly function. And her friends have to come and feed the kids for her and everything. And it's so dramatic because of that level of trauma. And so therapists say, yes, I know, but it's just a divorce. 45% of the population get divorced. So there must be something in this woman's background that is contributing to her having this very,
Reaction. Mm-hmm.
reaction. So they start looking for, abandonment issues or whatever. And it doesn't really do the proper service to this woman. Because
Mm.
if the therapist doesn't understand the extent to which it's not just the end of a marriage, but it's also a betrayal. It's a very profound betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
And if the therapist doesn't understand that and also doesn't understand that it's going to take at least a year, at very least a year, for this to stop being the central thing in your life. 2 years is normal. It's not a problem,
Mm-hmm.
and that she's going to sort of ping pong back and forth between feeling really wretched when she's in the car and the song comes on the radio and it breaks her heart.
Right.
And then later on when she's at work and she's fine and she's laughing with the other people. So there's that ping ponging back and forth that takes quite a while until she can really move on
Mm-hmm.
beyond the intensity of this. And so, there was a time when I told the women in my community, ask your therapist if they want the book, give me their address, and I'm going to mail the book to all the therapists because they need to understand what you're going through
Uh-huh.
because this is not a typical divorce.
Right, right. Now, you also, Vicki, describe a set of stages that women go through after experiencing, this emotional and shocking, experience. And starting with the tsunami stage, can you walk
Yes.
us through those stages and explain, how they help women navigate that recovery?
Totally. And it's very funny because, a woman will contact me and she'll say, "Oh, I'm in the ice storm phase," or "I'm in the thunderstorm phase," or "Oh my God, I think I'm still in the tsunami phase." So yeah, so I love the way that it's like these meteorological explanations, but it's very helpful. So in the initial phase, right after you hear the news that he's leaving, or you discover the affair and whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and the marriage is over, um, your world is turned upside down. So it's like, the wave comes in and you're under the water and you don't know if your legs are up or your legs are down, and everything is like you've been caught in a tsunami and you can't make sense of anything. It's a very, very scary, confusing, powerful time in your life
Mm-hmm.
where you have no sense of orientation, like you don't know where you are. So that's the tsunami phase. I have my list in front of me. So the tornado phase, your thoughts are spinning wildly as you try to come up with some desperate explanation. How is this happening? So it's like you're going round and round. This is the obsessiveness. You're going round and round and round like you're in a tornado, trying to say, is this true? You wake up in the morning and then you think, this is really happening. Oh my God, it is. And so that's a tornado. Thunderstorm, you feel besieged and raw, and maybe you're not that bad, but you're walking down the street, and every once in a while, another thunderbolt hits you. It might be a thought, it might be a letter from the lawyer, it might be a song on the radio. So you're still very fragile and raw, but you're not in the same extent of fragility as you had been earlier. And the next phase is the longest phase, which is the ice storm phase, where everything seems frozen. Like you're not totally sobbing all the time, but you feel gray and there's not a lot of happiness in your life. And you're just sort of going through the motions, doing what you need to do, excuse me, to get through the day. So that's the ice storm. Oh, then we have the fog, where you can see a little light coming through the fog. And the world is still gray, but it's not as dense. It's thinning out. And then we get the better phases, like the early summer phase, the sun shower phase, where sometimes it's raining and then sometimes the sun is there. So there's the sun and the rain, and then you're sort of resolving things into a summer day. So you're transitioning through all of these phases. And the good thing about it is that it tells you that there is a progression. When you're in the early phases, you feel like you're stuck. I'm never going to feel better, but you will. And you will progress through all these phases.
And that's why I think it is important just for our listeners, because at the beginning you talked about this. This is a process, and this may take longer than, a traditional breakup of a marriage. And it makes sense when you outline all those stages, why you said it may take 2 years to really get through all of those stages.
Exactly.
Now, for like family, friends, supporting women going through these stages, what are some ways they can really provide meaningful help without overwhelming or, pushing them too fast?
Yeah, I mean, it's very profound because the women really need to tell their story.
Okay.
So if you're lucky enough to have a family member or a friend who you can call as each little thing happens, and you tell your story, and you say, oh, I got this letter, or he emailed me, or he refused to do this, or whatever. And what the friends and family, it's a tremendous act of generosity to be able to, the phone rings and you pick up the phone and you look at, oh my God, it's her. And then you say, okay, I'm going to answer the call, because she will need to tell it and retell it and retell it. And so for the friends and family, what they need to learn is that they really don't need to give her much advice.
Okay.
The therapeutic thing is just to be there so that you listen and you provide that support through listening. And that, very often it hurts your heart. You so much want to try to help, but for you to recognize as a friend or family member that just by listening, it's helping tremendously. And sometimes it's doing concrete things, like saying to her, okay, we're taking a walk. Like in the early days, put your shoes on, we're going out, we're taking a walk. And just walk around the block a little bit. Or, come over and make food for the kids or something like that. Doing those concrete things. But it's so hard, and particularly for the mother watching her daughter go through this, or the sister, or the friend, or the father watching the daughter go through this. They want to help, but it just has to take the time that it takes. But the message that I have for the family members, and on my Runaway Husbands website, I have a blog, and one of my blog posts is directed to the family members because they need encouragement. So the message that I have for them is be patient. She will get better. It's not always going to be as bad.
Well, and I think, and you mentioned this earlier that there is quite the impact on the family. So they're kind of trying to reconcile the whole thing as well, because they're
Yes,
like, we'd not think that was the person he was. And
yes,
they feel that loss and
of
shock.
course.
And so I'm sure that that just makes it more difficult. And then, for the woman going through this and, with children still at home, she's going through this, but then trying to be strong for her children, that's just a whole nother level. And, how do you advise them to do that? Because I'm sure that's really difficult.
Yeah. I mean, I think actually sometimes it's easier when you have children at home
Yeah.
because you have to get up in the morning. You have to get dressed. You have to drive
Mm-hmm.
them to school. You have to help with the homework. It's not optional. And and so there are tasks that you have to do. And I think it's the hardest for those women who are not employed, who don't have children at home. Maybe their children are adults and have moved out. They have the whole day in front of them, and they're just ruminating
Mm.
and ruminating and ruminating. So for those women who have a job, who have to get up and go to work and make with the teeth and put a smile on it, it's in some ways it's easier. You get through the day, and then you just have to deal with the evenings and the weekends. But this raises a whole nother question, which is to what extent do you try to protect your children from hearing, oh, your dad, he's such a, he's so unfair and he has a girlfriend, he's such a liar, and all of this stuff, that there's a tremendous natural reaction to bring the kids on your side, particularly the adult kids, as your ally.
Right.
But this is their father also.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's often a touchy and complicated aspect to this whole thing, which is, and particularly for those people who have younger children who might be going back and forth 50-50 or something. And you don't want to be pumping your younger children for information. So where did you go and what did you eat and what's she like? And is she, was she nice to you? And does she cook? And, all the things you want to
All the
know.
things, right?
Yeah, but you
Yeah.
have to protect, that you don't want your younger children to be sort of the emissary who brings the news back from the other side. And so that's often something that women have to grapple with, and is part of what you were referring to, Heather, in terms of the growth. To be able to be patient, to not involve your children, to try to put your children's best interest at heart, keep pushing that forward, even though the
Mm.
temptation is huge, to tell the kids everything he did and he's such a bad person and, keep away from him.
Right. You are yes, and you're so right. Obviously, you're a therapist, because that's just not healthy for your children. And they're
Yeah.
gonna come to resent you if you're gonna just pepper them with questions and you're just, and you said it already a couple times I know through this podcast, but journaling, using if you don't have someone else to talk to,
Yes.
and even if you do, write down all these things that you want to know or that you would, because at least that's a healthy outlet to get it out of all of the ruminating and obsessing. And it'll probably help that part, as it resolves itself, but at least it allows you a healthier way rather than your children, which we just know whether they're, however young or even adult, either way, it can
Yes.
be really, work against you.
Yes.
And I know that's hard for people, I think, because they think, well, the kids are adults and they want to know and they're on my side. And it's like, yeah, but they're still your children and he's still their
Yeah.
dad. And
Well,
it's
it's
tough.
sort of
It's tough.
it's tough because sometimes it's true, that the kids are totally supportive of mom and they don't want to see dad. And they certainly don't want to go to dad's house and have dinner with the other woman who was their
Right.
next door neighbor when they were growing up or whatever,
Right.
was their
Yeah.
babysitter or was their whatever. They certainly don't want to do that. And their alliance is strongly fixed with the mother. That's normal. And so you can't change that, and so you'll accept that. But for those kids where there's more gray area and they're more ambivalent, then you want to try to keep your counsel and not say to them too much about your opinion of the dad.
Yes, which is difficult, but I think it will be worth it in the long run. Now, Vicki, what final piece of advice would you give to women listening who are either, in the middle of a divorce, like this, or, wondering, oh my gosh, could this happen to me?
Yes.
Those kind of listeners.
Okay. So first of all, very often when you're getting divorced, your former partner will turn on you and say a lot of negative things about you. So first of all, you have to recognize that you didn't have to be the most perfect wife. He probably wasn't the most perfect husband. You
Mm-hmm.
don't turn if he's turned on you, don't turn on yourself. So the most important thing is for you to maintain your self-compassion and your self-love. And even if you look back and you say, oh, I was always on his case about this, or you regret certain things, that you can still love yourself when you're
Mm-hmm.
regretting certain things. That you didn't have to be 100% perfect in order to be a valuable and loving wife. And for those people who are in a marriage, and might be listening to this because they're interested, it's for me, I think it's very clear that every once in a while you want to sit down with him and say, how are we doing? And to take his complaints seriously. If he says, oh, please stop telling me that I have to clean up more, or I have to lose weight, or I have to eat healthy, or what, to take his complaints seriously, to listen to the complaints, but to do an occasional check-in and say, how are we doing? And to be all ears and be able to hear what it is that your husband might have to say that might not be, the most positive or flattering, because that's what gives the relationship more resilience. If you can tolerate hearing the complaints, and even invite hearing the complaints.
That's wonderful advice, Vicki. I appreciate that. And I know that our listeners will as well. And we are nearing the end of the show. But before we go, can you impart on our listeners what you've learned about women and their resilience throughout your career and experience?
It's very funny, Heather. When I started doing this work, so first of all, my website is runawayhusbands.com. I just want to mention that. Runaway Husbands is plural.com. So when I first started doing this work, I give a lot of workshops and retreats, and I do online group therapy, and I'm meeting with, I mean, it's a blessing for me. It's like my life's mission, and I'm so thankful. So thankful my husband left. Thank you. Um, and so I'm meeting with all these women, and I'm just being blown away. I go to a workshop and I'm like, these women are amazing. It's
Mhm.
one after the next. They're all amazing, and we have such a deep conversations and lots of laughs and lots of insights. And I'm growing all the time from the privilege that I have of working with the women in our community. Now, that I think maybe part of it is that the tendency is for women who are caretakers to be in this kind of relationship, and the husband leaves and they tend to be caretakers, but that so many women have been, they're so smart and brave and extraordinary, really extraordinary women. And I wish they knew what I know about them, which is how beautiful and special they are. And you don't have to be like thin and gorgeous and beautiful and young and everything like that, in order to be beautiful. So for them to know how beautiful they are, they're full of life, they're full of love, they care about people, they're trying to do their best. We're all trying to muddle through this hard thing called life, and we do the best that we can. So for the women that I work with and the women listening, to really, really reach down and bring up that self-love and self-compassion that I've mentioned, in order to care for ourselves the way we care for others.
Oh, well, that is beautiful. Thank you so much. Now, Vicki, you told us your website, runawayhusbands.com. And
Exactly.
any other places that our listeners can find you for resources?
No, that's basically it.
Okay.
The book is there, Runaway Husbands, and there's another book for the community and a book for parents, how to tell kids about divorce. So those are my three divorce books. And also my book about sister relationships is on the website. So there we go.
Awesome. Well, we will make sure we will all have all the links in our show notes for our listeners. And we've reached the end of our show today. Thank you so much, Vicki Stark, for joining us to discuss abandonment and what that means for you and your divorce.
Thank you so much for having me, Heather.
Absolutely. And listeners, if you or someone you know is going through divorce or is thinking about a divorce in the Northeast Florida area, please reach out to us at FloridaWomen'sLawGroup.com. You'll find our practice areas and the link to our website in the show notes. Thank you for listening.